$10 million seems like a lot of money, and I'm not going to lie, it absolutely is. But I've sat across from people who have exactly that $10 million, sometimes more, and I can tell you that it comes with its own set of worries. How do you protect that wealth from a lawsuit that comes out of nowhere? How do you pass it to the next generation without the government taking their pound of flesh that can amount to millions? How do you make sure that your children inherit a legacy and not just a complicated mess and string of different trusts that make little to no sense unless you're an estate lawyer? Money solves some problems. It creates others. Different ones, but also real ones. Which is why today, at this Financial Prof episode, we're going to be talking about the 5 levels of retirement wealth, starting at $500,000 and going all the way up to $10 million. What each level actually feels like to live, the risks hiding out at each level that most people never plan for, and the specific tax, estate, and financial planning moves that matter most at each one and that you can take because the right move at level 2 is oftentimes the wrong move at level 4, and vice versa. And at $10 million plus, one wrong tax move or estate strategy plan could wipe out hundreds of thousands, even millions that could have otherwise stayed in yours or your family's pockets. My name is John Norberg. I'm a certified financial planner and the founder of Norberg Wealth Management. And again, with that introduction, allow me to welcome you to this latest edition of the Financial Prof series. So I want to start with a question about level 1 that almost no one ever thinks to ask, because the answer reveals something important about every level that goes above it. You see, nobody tells you what your retirement number actually buys, because while $1 million can oftentimes sound like security, and sometimes it truthfully is, sometimes, depending on when you retire, how you withdraw, and what life throws at you, it can be 18 to 30 years of careful rationing and a prayer that the roof doesn't need replacing, and the market doesn't drop, and nobody gets sick. Now, which one it actually is depends almost entirely on how you manage it and how you plan around it. You see, according to the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, only about 4.7% of Americans actually have $1 million or more in retirement accounts. If you're at level 1, that is somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million, you have already done something that most Americans never manage, and that deserves to be noted. But here's the true reality of this level. Again, this is the thing that people don't always think about, even the ones who are already there. A $700,000 portfolio at a 4% withdrawal rate generates $28,000 per year. Now, if you add the average Social Security benefit of roughly 23.7K annually, you're going to be looking at just over $50,000 of gross income before taxes, before healthcare, and before inflation erodes the purchasing power of that number over the next 25 years. Now, don't get me wrong, this can be a very livable retirement if nothing goes wrong, but the problem is that something more often than not does, and it happens at the worst possible time, right? We've all been there. Fidelity Investments estimates that the average couple will spend close to $300,000 on healthcare costs after the age of 65. Now, a single long-term care event can cost $100,000 or more per year. A bad sequence of market returns in the first few years of retirement can permanently impair a portfolio that might otherwise have lasted a lifetime. And that factor is not something that you asked for, wished for, or had really any control over. So level 1 is not the most comfortable place to sit and absorb surprises, and retirement, by its very nature, tends to produce them. So let's talk about a few planning moves if you're at this level, again, between 500K and $1 million. Roth conversions. Roth conversions before RMDs begin at 73 or 75 can significantly reduce the lifetime tax drag on withdrawals, keeping more money in the portfolio longer. You might consider filling the 22% bracket during that conversion window. Now, for estate planning, at this level, a simple will, healthcare directive, and durable power of attorney are pretty much must-haves. Make sure beneficiary designations on IRAs and 401ks are current. They override the will, right? And financially speaking, delaying Social Security as long as health permits can allow the portfolio to grow well, and an HSA can also help supplement that further. But one of the biggest risks at this level is actually sequence of returns risk, which again is how the market performs, particularly in that first few years of retirement. So, level 2, moving on, is where the math starts to look a little different. This is where a Roth conversion stops being a nice to have and can start being the difference between a comfortable retirement and one that's unnecessarily expensive. But it's also, and this oftentimes surprises people, where the IRS starts to pay a little closer attention to you. So let's talk about level 2, the comfort threshold, between a million and 2 million. At level 2, the retirement picture changes quite meaningfully. A $1.5 million portfolio at 4% withdrawal is going to generate $60,000 per year. Now add in Social Security and you're probably looking at $80,000 to $90,000 annually. Well, that's enough to travel, to help family occasionally, to cover healthcare without it feeling like an emergency. This is the level that most of my clients are oftentimes aiming for, and for good reason. It does tend to represent genuine stability, the all-American retirement, if you will, right? But stability at level 2 comes with a hidden adversary, which is the tax system. According to EBRI's analysis of Federal Reserve data, only about 1.8% of Americans reach $2 million in their retirement accounts. So if you're between a million and 2 million, you are in somewhat rarefied territory. And the IRS knows it. Because at this level, the combination of required minimum distributions, Social Security taxation, and IRMA, that is the income-related monthly adjustment amount, surcharges on your Medicare premiums, can oftentimes push a household into significantly higher tax brackets than they ever occupied during their working years. And just to give you a bit of an example, here's how that happens. Let's say you've got $1.5 million in a traditional IRA. Grows at 6% potentially between retirement at 65 and RMDs starting at age 73, let's just say. That'll become approximately $2.4 million by the time those distributions are forced out at you. The first RMD is likely to end up at about $87,000. Add Social Security of, call it $45,000 for a couple, and the household gross income in year 1 of RMDs exceeds $130,000 before a single intentional withdrawal. That's the 22% bracket, potentially pushing into 24% eventually, and it grows every year. One of my more favorite authors is T.S. Eliot, and in his piece Four Quartets he wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Retirement planning has a version of that. You spend decades building the account, you arrive, you're retired, and then you discover that the tax architecture of what you've built is going to cost you possibly far more than it ever needed to, possibly far more than you ever paid during your working years. And all you had to do was look at it ahead of time. And that planning can make all the difference. So again, what kind of planning moves are we talking about? Guess what? Roth conversions again. That Roth conversion window, oftentimes the years between retirement and RMDs at age 73 to 75, is very important, especially as your wealth grows. Annual conversions of $60,000 to $100,000 calibrated to stay within that 22% bracket can reduce lifetime income by lifetime taxes by oftentimes 6 figures or more, not to mention the wealth building that can occur on the tax-free side in the Roth IRA. Now, state taxes are another matter, and so are estate taxes, right? So many states have one version of inheritance tax or estate tax. And if this is you retiring with $1 million to $2 million, oftentimes your portfolio is going to grow over that time. If you're not withdrawing off of it, by more than 4%, it can potentially grow to 4, 5, even 6 million, depending on how long your retirement is and how much it actually grows. This is where estate planning can become important to know exactly what your state tax is in addition to the federal side, right? Now, level 3 that we're going to talk about in a second, is where something truly interesting happens. The financial anxiety is largely gone, and in its place is a different kind of question, one that's harder to answer, and one that most financial plans tend not to address at all. So level 3, $2 million to $5 million. This is where fewer than 0.8% of Americans retire, with $3 million or more in their retirement accounts, according to the Federal Reserve. At level 3, again, that's 2 million to 5 million, you are in the top fraction of American savers. So what does it feel like when you're between 2 million and 5 million dollars? It feels like freedom. Real, unqualified freedom. You travel without doing the math first. You give to your children and grandchildren without it affecting your plan. You can cover health care, including long-term care if it comes to that, without it being a crisis. You have options that simply don't exist below this level. Oftentimes, you wake up in retirement without financial anxiety as your first thought. So that's why a lot of people shoot for this as their level that they want to retire at. But level 3, as I hinted at earlier, introduces a planning problem that is in a way the most expensive of all the levels, because the people here are successful enough to have real assets, but often not advised aggressively enough to protect them from unnecessary tax erosion and, again, estate complexity. The IRA tax trap is most dangerous here. A $3 million traditional IRA, which grows at 6% all the way to age 73, can become approximately $5.4 million at the RMD start date. Now, the first required distribution at that point is likely to be around $200,000. At that income level, a married couple is firmly shooting into the 32% federal bracket. Medicare IRMA surcharges add thousands per year in additional premiums, and every year that RMD continues to grow. Over a 20-year retirement, the cumulative federal tax on a $3 million traditional IRA, managed by default, could reach $1.5 million or more. That's not a rounding error or something to just push off to future planning. It could be a second home or a grandchild's education, not to mention legacy. So at level 3, again, the Roth conversion strategy becomes more sophisticated, but no less necessary to consider. The goal is not just reducing RMDs, it's to engineer the entire retirement tax trajectory. Partial conversions, now calibrated towards the top of the 24% bracket each year, coordinated with charitable giving and Social Security timing, can save hundreds of thousands over the course of a normal retirement. Qualified charitable distributions, such as QCDs, which give directly from an IRA to charity and satisfy the RMD without triggering taxable income, can become a hugely powerful tool at this level. And for estate planning, federal estate tax is unlikely to apply, but again, you've got to consider the state's side. And a revocable living trust, properly funded, can not only avoid probate, maintain privacy, and provide a clear succession framework, but oftentimes can have favorable state tax treatment as well. Financially planning, long-term care insurance, or a hybrid life/LTC policy can deserve serious consideration. But you also have the ability at this level to seriously consider self-funding. This is where a careful analysis of the numbers between one of those policies I just mentioned for long-term care versus what it would cost on the other hand to self-fund can make a significant difference in what actually happens if you do encounter one of those events where you need long-term care. All right, so moving on to level 4 is where the vocabulary of financial planning changes. The questions that occupied every level below this one, will I have enough? What if something goes wrong? How do I protect the plan? Are often largely settled. And what moves into their place is something most financial plans just aren't designed to handle. So level 4, abundance, as I like to call it, is that $5 to $10 million level. So level 4, $5 to $10 million, the sustainability of the retirement is not in question. A $7 million portfolio, which is conservatively invested at 4%, can generate $280,000 per year. The money now ceases to be as much of a problem. The problem, and I say this having worked with people at this level for years, is everything else that surrounds the money. As I talk about on this channel all the time, money is just a tool, a means to an end, right? So let's talk about the things that surround that means. For example, who gets it when you're gone, and in what form? How do you protect it from a lawsuit, a creditor, or a divorcing heir? How do you give meaningfully without losing control, and also make sure the wealth that you built over a lifetime of blood, sweat, and tears doesn't disappear in a generation because nobody structured it properly? One of my more favorite poets is the good Saint John Henry Newman. And one of my lines that I like to quote of his is that growth is the only evidence of life. Now, this has all sorts of implications, right? But at level 4, let's just talk about financial growth, for example. Growth is less the question. Growth from a financial perspective, that is. Growth of the person or family behind the money is where it really starts to take on new meaning. How do you grow into using this wealth now that you're in retirement? How do you show that the life that you want to live is one of intention and not just letting it happen to you? These are the questions you have to start considering. Now, I'll just talk for a little bit about tax levels. Again, Roth conversions, right? You're going to hear this at practically every level. But here at this level, they can save literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions plus. Now, at this level, for most people, the federal estate tax level, being at $15 million, right, per individual, isn't still, as of yet, much of an issue. But if this portfolio grows, it can start to become one. If you pass away with $10 million, you're still under the level. But if that 10 million becomes 20 over the course of your retirement, you're going to pay federal estate level. Now, asset protection is also meaningfully important. At this level, you're a definite target for litigation. A lawsuit, a creditor claim, assets held in personal names or irrevocable trusts offer less protection. Now, there are a number of different kinds of trusts at this level that can help protect against some of these more targeted attacks, if you will, that those who have experienced this kind of success do tend to experience. LLCs can become important, especially if rental property is part of that portfolio, as it is for many people who work with us. And again, going back to the tax piece for a minute, charitable strategies like donor advised funds, which allow you to make a large charitable contribution in a high income year, say a liquidity event, and take that deduction immediately while distributing grants to specific charities over the coming years, right, can become a really important strategy. Understanding what your family's charitable goals are doesn't all have to happen at once, especially if you have that DAF or donor advised fund in place. You can start thinking about a family foundation. This is something we'll talk about at the final level, right? But that also can be a form of both legacy as well as charitable giving and tax planning all wrapped up into one. The priority at level 4 is not just minimizing your tax bill, it's minimizing the combined tax bill across your estate and your heirs. Again, talking about those Roth conversions, but also protection. So protecting it from unnecessary taxation while building through normal market growth, which will continue to grow the portfolio, obviously, if everything has been done right, but allowing it to pass to those entities or people that we really truly feel deserve it in the most tax efficient manner possible. One example, a spousal lifetime access trust, or SLAT, allows one spouse to gift assets out of the taxable estate while retaining indirect access through the other spouse. Or an irrevocable life insurance trust, not for everybody, but an ILIT, as they're sometimes known, can remove assets from the estate while allowing a payment upon your passing to come tax-free to heirs, or to, again, another type of estate planning vehicle that ultimately benefits those entities or people you most wish to benefit with this money. So, again, these are just a few ideas, but I really want to get to level 5, because this is the level that opened the video. $10 million and above. Now, I told you, and it's true, it comes with its own worries. So let me show you exactly what those are and what serious planning can look like at this level. So again, level 5 is over $10 million. You've made $10 million and above, right? The number on the statement is, at this point, almost besides the point. A $15 million portfolio, which is invested at even a conservative 3% real return, generates $450,000 per year in perpetuity. The money doesn't run out at that rate. It doesn't even come close, which means that the entire frame of retirement planning, will I have enough, will it last, etc., no longer applies. But what applies instead is a set of questions which has a different frame, and they are admittedly harder ones. More money, more problems, am I right? So some of those questions that I've heard from clients in this state are, how do you protect this wealth from people who see it as a target? Because at this level, as we hinted at earlier, you are definitively a target. A lawsuit from a business dispute, or a claim from a disgruntled contractor, a creditor action, maybe tied to a real estate investment. The wealthier you are, the more aggressive and the quicker that those claims come. And assets which sit in personal accounts or even revocable trusts offer essentially no protection once that litigation begins. And by the way, lest you think this is never going to happen to you, litigation is one of the most common, uh, um, one of the most common causes of catastrophic loss for those at the $5 million and above level, right? At this level, too, the federal estate tax exemption of $15 million per person, or $30 million for a married couple, is quite possibly going to be exceeded. Now, it does provide meaningful shelter, but for a $30 million estate, which could happen to you if your $15 million, let's just say, grows substantially over the course of the next 30 years, you need to be thinking about how to shelter these assets, not just from state, but now federal as well. And how do you make sure that your wealth survives, not just the transfer, but the generation that receives it? Research on inherited wealth is unambiguous. Without structure, governance, without a shared sense of purpose, significant wealth tends to dissipate within 2, at most 3 generations. Not through bad investments, but through the absence of intention. And intentionality is what we talk about on this channel with some frequency. This is where having a family philosophy and approach to wealth that's shared across generations can make all the difference. So, a few things to consider here. Dynasty trusts. A dynasty trust is designed to hold assets across multiple generations, removing them from the taxable estate at the first transfer and shielding them from estate tax at every subsequent transfer. Assets in a properly structured dynasty trust are also protected from the creditors, divorcing spouses, and legal judgments of every beneficiary generation. A $10 million transfer to a dynasty trust that grows to $100 million over 60 years, think the Kennedy clan, right? Passes to your great-grandchildren essentially intact. Without it, estate tax at each generational transfer could consume 40% or more at every step. Another example of a step to consider: irrevocable trust structures. This is where you really have to start thinking about irrevocable trusts, like that spousal lifetime access trust, or the intentionally defective grantor trusts, or even grantor retained annuity trusts. These are instruments of serious estate planning, which at level 5 you need to at least be considering, each one serving a different purpose: removing future appreciation, transferring business interests at a discount, creating tax-free income streams. None of them are simple, and all of them required a coordinated team: your estate attorney, a certified financial planner, and tax counsel working together, not independently. Now, talking for a little bit about charitable architecture, at level 5, philanthropy is rarely just generosity. It's also a strategy, because a properly structured private family foundation or donor-advised fund can reduce the taxable estate, create a family governance vehicle, fund causes that you care about across generations even after you're gone, and provide meaningful work for family members who want to help steward that giving. Charitable remainder trusts can convert appreciated, low-basis assets, the kind that accumulate over a lifetime of investing, into an income stream that can continue on without triggering capital gains on the conversion. Family governance is also important. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. The families I've seen manage this level of wealth across generations almost always have one thing in common. They treat the wealth as a shared responsibility, not a personal windfall, as stewards rather than a dragon atop its hoard, right? Family investment committees, regular meetings even, structured giving programs, and introducing the younger generations to these philosophies early. These are the architecture points that give the wealth meaning and give the next generation those tools that they need to steward it. In the words of the inimitable William Blake, he wrote that no bird soars too high if he soars with his own wings. And oftentimes, at this level, the people who have created this wealth know what it takes to build it. They are the ones who have soared on their own wings. But the generation inheriting it often has an entirely different perspective, because they're not the ones who, at this point, have given that blood, sweat, and tears to get to this level. So that's where these philosophies, these frameworks, these family investment committees even, can become incredibly important. These are the planning moves that you need to make beyond just sitting down with your CFP to help make sure that people are on the same page about what the family's approach to all of this can be. Now, we've already mentioned some of the strategies that you can consider at this level, and I do want to be clear about one thing about any of the estate strategies, as well as tax strategies in this video, that while I'm not an estate attorney, giving legal advice, or a tax attorney or CPA giving tax advice specifically. These are the things that any good financial planner at any of these levels that we've talked about should at least be bringing to your attention. So if this is the first time you're hearing about something like a life insurance trust that can pay out tax-free lump sum to your beneficiaries upon your passing, while also having prior removed a significant chunk of the assets from the estate, or a family foundation, which can hire your children or grandchildren, giving them meaningful work that also helps steward the family's money and allows them to, again, participate in that philosophy towards wealth. These are conversations that you ought to be having. And again, if you're not, we at Norberg Wealth Management would be honored to help have those conversations, not only with you, but with the people you care about, so that you can see how we work, our approach to wealth, to legacy, to planning, and how it might be a good fit for you. Now, I hope you're leaving with a more precise answer to the questions of where do I stand and am I falling behind than when you clicked the video in the first place. And hopefully with a few ideas to think about and even bring back to your own family. Hopefully a few techniques that if you've never heard about them or maybe heard about them for the first time in a new way, you can think about implementing for your benefit, for your family's benefit, and for the benefit of those who come after you, right? So, if you enjoyed this video, I would encourage you to subscribe. In the meantime, if we can be of help, there's a link in the description. Please click it. It would take 2 minutes to fill out, and it'll allow us to have a quick half-hour conversation about what's most important to you and how we might be a good fit for that. In the meantime, I look forward to seeing you out there.